Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Williams, and you are listening or perhaps even watching to another episode of Retail Redeveloped. I'm so excited today. I'm being joined by one Howard Meitiner. Now, why do we want to sit down and talk to Howard today? Because Howard has seen a lot in the retail world. He has done multiple different things that I'm going to let him tell you all about. But obviously, he was the president and CEO of a little bitty company called Sephora that a couple of you guys might have heard of. I can't wait to pick his brain about how he took them into growth mode and helped make them the company that is a juggernaut in the health and beauty space today. But before we do all that, Howard, do me a favor, introduce yourself, let everybody know what you're all about, why they should be excited to hear about you, and more importantly, if you can just touch on the why behind your amazing career in retail and how you got to sit in the chair that you're in today.
Well, good day, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I started life off in England. I was a music lover, and so naturally I joined the local department store in their record sales department, which was the old vinyl records. And I was fortunate enough to work for a company, the Debenham Group, who nurtured my career in the UK. Now, interestingly, Debenhams, being a department store, has now liquidated. And so there you had a once very proud and powerful name that has since disappeared. And I think it's symptomatic of how retailing evolves. And I was fortunate to move to Hong Kong and the Far East, where I worked for a great company, Duty Free Shoppers, and we were involved in the travel retail business. Before there was really a large travel retail business, we were the pathfinders. And so we were taking advantage of a huge burst in international travel, particularly for the Japanese and Chinese overseas travelers. And we were at one point bought by LVMH,
Wow.
the Louis Vuitton group. And after being acquired by LVMH, they had at the same time acquired Sephora. And they asked me to launch Sephora in the US in the late 90s from nothing. And today, I think everyone knows that name and the impact that it's had on the beauty business, along with its main competitor, Ulta. And we see today how that continues to evolve in terms of the new partnerships that they formed. And through all of that period, I developed a skill in turnarounds, crisis management, startups, strategic redesigns. And I really took that then post my career with LVMH into working with investors and other groups in helping to solve problems and do turnarounds in the retail sector. And that's what I do today. And I do that with a great group of people at the Karl Marx Advisors Group. And we are engaged in helping people pivot and respond to the disruption that occurs constantly in the retail sector.
Yeah, you guys must be really bored right now because there's no real crises in the retail world. You guys just like sitting around playing Uno or something?
Well, we do get bored, it's true, but not at the moment, fortunately. No, the thing that's worth noting is that no matter what company and no matter what sector, because we do help people out in all sectors, the problems are always essentially the same. And it doesn't matter what type of company. And so it's almost mind-blowing that the same mistakes can be repeated all the time. I mean, as a CEO of companies, I, like many other CEOs, read all the latest insights and strategies that professors and others were espousing. And yet, even though we've read all of those things, it's amazing how many times we see the same mistakes being repeated. So we go in and we help try and do something about those mistakes.
So before we start talking about crisis management, because I want to dive in uh, really heavy into what you said there, I'd love to understand a little bit about what those consistent mistakes are so we can potentially help some people that are out there listening, because a large part of the listener base are either they're in the business of retail, right? So they're either out there opening stores from a real estate standpoint, or they're trying to manage their brands. So I want to dig into that. But most important question, if you're a British music fan, who was your favorite of the British Invasion? We got to start with the vinyl that was on spin heavy.
There is only one group, isn't there? The Beatles.
Who? I don't know if you're a white hat guy or a black hat guy. I got to figure that out first.
Well, I was a heavy metal fan as well, but no, the Beatles and Sergeant Pepper's changed the face of music, and we're very proud of them. And so many others followed, but there was no doubt that the late 60s and 70s was the best period of creative music I think that people have ever witnessed. And it's interesting that people born today are going back there to listen to that music.
Yeah, I have the White Album sitting about 5 feet to my left.
Good man.
As well as Abbey Road, as well as most of the big ones. But I got to tell you, if you put me on a desert island and I could only have one, I would go Stones instead of Beatles. Don't throw any. I know that's a very volatile thing to say to a man that is passionate about Sergeant Pepper, but I love them both. But man, the Stones just get me rocking and rolling.
Led Zeppelin 2 was right up there, and we might even make a closet Brit of you, as you obviously love the British Invasion. That's great to see.
Yeah, I absolutely do. And we could probably spend a whole podcast talking about, old becoming new, and how vinyl is seeing just this massive resurgence. And I was hiking this weekend in a beautiful place called Grandfather Mountain, which is one of the big peaks in North Carolina. And there was this girl up there. It was freezing cold, right? I mean, they have the same temperature as Newfoundland, right? At the top of this mountain. It's very, very cold up here. And there was this girl in ripped jeans ripping out her Polaroid that was like this big around and snapping little Polaroid shots at the top of this peak. And it just cracked me up. It's so funny to feel this nostalgia for things like that. And people always make fun of me because I love to listen to vinyl, and they ask me why, right? It's like, I'm sure you have Spotify. It's like, yes, I have Spotify. I have every song at the touch of a button. But I feel like vinyl is kind of the penance that I pay for music being so easy now, because I'm not carrying around my CD book that's, weighed 40 pounds. And there's something about having that just press play album that has kind of gotten lost. And I love that vinyl really makes you listen to the whole album as opposed to just picking singles. So,
the thing is, we can learn something from this. Why were the albums so important? Because we fell in love with the album and the experience, and we would have friends around. And so in the same way, we see that now in service going forward, which is, I think there's a move back towards something more personal. Because yes, you can download all the best tracks you like, but is it the same experience? I would argue not. So how do then we create across all different industry sectors these experiences that are going to give people something that they're missing and something they're looking for?
Yeah, I think well said. I think that's a great opportunity. And again, I think I think the longer we talk, the more we're going to realize that we're not going to have enough time to knock out all these subjects. Okay, so now that we've put everybody to sleep on our little musical diatribe, the 8 other people that are listening that like the Stones and the Beatles as much as we do, you're welcome. Let's go back to the early days, right? You mentioned Louis Vuitton, obviously the biggest juggernaut in luxury by orders of magnitude. The only other group that has any kind of stranglehold like they do would be Luxottica, maybe, right? Like I can't really think of anybody else that has such a stranglehold. But in the beginning when you were with them and they decided to launch this unknown brand called Sephora in the United States, what do you think was the secret sauce of Sephora? You know, why did they see an opportunity to launch that in the US? And has that secret sauce changed and pivoted to the Sephora that we see today, or were they able to kind of find a vein and stick with it and ride it all the way to the top?
Well, and I don't have to sort of be overly emotional of the man, but the man that really understood Sephora was Bernard Arnault. It was a 50-store chain in France. And he saw something in the chain in France that he realized could be a phenomenon in the beauty business. When he interviewed me for the job, he told me that Sephora would come to dominate the beauty space. He saw it. But Sephora had nothing to do with retailing. The man that invented Sephora, his name was Dominique Mondonneau. He was one of these quintessential outgoing French artists. And he was drawn to creating Sephora by two things. One was beauty and one was freedom. No sales per square foot, no brand productivity. It was beauty and freedom. And his logic was this. In France, he believed that women were pounced upon by sales assistants in the stores, spritzed with fragrances. They couldn't touch the product. So he created theater. The original Sephora stores had red carpets, which were totally impractical, by the way.
Right.
He had beautiful people dressed all in black with black gloves, and it was a phenomenon, but it had nothing to do with what we would normally associate with retail metrics. And there's something to be learned from that. He was a visionary, and he found in Bernard Arnault a partner with lots of money. And so Bernard Arnault bought the business from him. Dominic probably found a beach somewhere where he could paint. And Bernard said to me when he first interviewed me, he said, "Howard, I want to have 50 stores open in the US in 18 months. Now,
you're talking to a commercial real estate guy. Like, I just started like sweating when you said that. 50 stores in 18 months. I usually think that's like a prank call.
The thing was, you got to think about it this way. It's a crazy thing to do, except he understood that if we were going to be taken seriously by the brands, we had to show intent, because the department stores at that time had a lock. And so we brought Sephora in very religiously in compliance with the way it was being done in France. And it's just grown and evolved far beyond where it was originally. Yes, it's become less dramatic, but has retained its total innovation. And, the things they're doing today with incubators, laboratories for other products, they are constantly pushing the envelope. And I've been very, very impressed with how it's evolved. And, when we look at it today, they're continuing to evolve. They're looking at trying different formats, trying different types of emphasis. When we first started, there was a big emphasis on fragrance. That's been cut down. Then it went more to color. Now it's into treatments. So the beauty of the Sephora concept is that it can evolve with time, and it has. And the other thing he did is he opened up Sephora.com, when nobody really knew what they were doing. But again, he realized that he had to fund that, and he did. And Sephora is now one of the top online websites. So one of the great things about when you have money, you can invest, you can take risk. And one of his great strengths is he's never been afraid to take risk. And when you look at the big companies today like Amazon, Google, and others, they've got the money to take risks too, and they're doing it all the time. And success breeds success. The stronger get stronger. And but at the heart of it, you have to have someone who believes in it. And he believed in what Mondino did, and he visualized how Sephora could evolve.
That's amazing. So one thing that always fascinates me on one of these stories, right? Like you have this vision, you have this kernel of an idea, you have this passionate entrepreneur who sees it, right? He sees it. He's looking around corners. He's looking a mile down the road, and he understands what it needs to be. And you know, I hear story after story of these incredible entrepreneurs. But what fascinates me, in addition to that, is how do you figure out how to scale that, right? Like, how do you take that vision and then keep to that vision when you're trying to open 50 stores in 18 months with labor, with logistics, with all of the tough things that happen when you're trying to kind of blitz scale something? How were you guys able to keep that the DNA of the brand intact? Because I can tell you right now, my wife is obsessed with Sephora, right? Like, she loves it. She could shop anywhere she wants. There's an Ulta closer to our house than a Sephora, but you know, whatever they do, she loves. So how were you guys able to keep that DNA intact?
Patience. I mean, we made no money in the first couple of years because we were spending money so quickly opening up all these different locations. You know, we were running at 100 miles an hour trying to open up a distribution center. I mean, you know, it would be a very fascinating business study. But fortunately, the strategy was get 50 stores open, make a statement, profits will come.
Right.
And of course they did. So you see this in other situations where you have financial backers for entrepreneurs who are prepared to fund them without profits initially. But then you have to have a great deal of faith in the eventual success of
Right.
the concept. So, you know, that's what allowed us to stay faithful to the image and the brand, because we weren't being pressurized to turn a profit
Day one.
immediately on these stores.
So let me ask you this: who else right now is doing a really good job of that? Who is taking let's call it a pure idea and is bringing that to the marketplace? I'd love to understand who you think is doing a great job at, and then maybe somebody that you thought has at some point lost the plot. And I'll let you decide, you know, who you want to start with. But I'd love to understand and kind of get a little bit of a look into your brain about who is doing this well and who is maybe could need a little refresher.
Well, you know, it starts with the entrepreneur, the innovator, and I mean, who would have thought? You know, I'm going to sell untucked shirts. I'm going to sell Bombas socks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to sell all bird shoes.
Mm-hmm.
These guys were nuts, but they believed in what they were doing. And you look at the valuations of those. So you have certain situations where the entrepreneur saw an opportunity and exploited it. Then you have others who take advantage of disruption and change. I mean, look at what Lululemon has done. You
They
know,
built a whole new category that didn't exist.
right, the whole athleisure thing was there, but they saw it early and they moved. And then look what they did recently. They paid $500 million in cash for Mirror, right? Because it's a synergistic business. And in one day, their valuation went up $2 billion. So what you, at the heart, you have a business that sees a need, or a business that sees the need to pivot. And when you look at the type of companies that have got into trouble, other than those who have become overburdened by debt or didn't respond to sector disruption, it's because the customer was telling them, I no longer like your format. So department stores is a good example. J.C. Penney is another example. You know, they didn't have the foresight to pivot early on. And so, you know, you can look at different sectors and see the same thing. Look at the restaurant business right now. The crisis has created a whole new business around delivery. You know, look at what's happening with shopping malls. They've suddenly realized they have an asset. It's called a car park, right? High streets realize they have sidewalks and roads that they can precinct and build new opportunities from. So you have some people that just stay inside the box, and you have other people that love to be outside the box. And so businesses now that are doing well are those that are being flexible, they're capital light, but they're looking at how the customer's changing. If you look at healthcare, look at what's going to happen in terms of home health. Are you going to go and see your doctor every time now? Maybe you go online and you have some consultation there. So every sector is seeing this disruption, and there's opportunity for everyone involved.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I was talking to, you mentioned restaurants. I was talking to the CEO of a fairly major restaurant group yesterday. It's one of those restaurant groups that's big, but has still kept their DNA, right? It's still a cool place to go in most areas, even though they've got, you know, big balance sheet. So they've done a really good job. And he said a lot of their stores are down 75 or are still doing roughly 75% of what they were doing pre-COVID, but their EBITDA has gone up because of thinning out labor, because of ordering on apps and to go, and, you know, completely changing their ordering system when they're in the store. They're like, these young people, they don't want to fill out cards and tell you what they want. Like they bang it out on their iPhone, and all of a sudden, you know, a new plate of food and a drink shows up, and it's enabled us to almost transform the way we look at labor. So to your point, the people like that are going to continue to thrive, and the people that are saying, woe is me, are going to be the victim.
Well, you know, we're only limited by our own imaginations, right? I mean, you think about it. Why should a shopping mall could be called a shopping mall anymore? Because it's not going to survive as a shopping mall, but it could survive as a community galleria that has a whole bunch of things going on there. And it's been well documented, the types of pivots that are going on, from fulfillment centers to medical centers to anything that the consumer wants. And these were well placed in transportation hubs that are going to make it easy for people to get to. So we've got to stop thinking about things in historic terms. I mean, I read something recently, a research where they were saying that 72% of people shopped for apparel in stores before, and only 55% will in future. Well, that's if you make the in-store shopping experience the same.
Right.
If you don't change your shopping center, people won't come there. But if you create community spaces, if you create cultural spaces and a myriad of other things, you redefine what the old shopping mall was and what a community galleria is. and you can redefine your business the same way. But unless people have the courage to pivot and change, they will find themselves losing their way and eventually either being sold or filing for restructuring.
So let's dig into that a little bit, Howard. Big news in North Carolina. I'm coming to you from Charlotte, North Carolina. I know you're up in Connecticut. Let's see, Epic Games, which is the company that owns Fortnite, which I won't let my 8-year-old play, and he's like so mad at me, right? Like he really wants to play Fortnite. That's another podcast. But Epic Games, massive company, just bought Cary Town Center in Cary, North Carolina, which is a suburb, very wealthy suburb of Raleigh. And they are literally going to transform this struggling mall in totality to their new campus. So to your point, these malls are changing in a drastic way. Obviously, that is completely shunning retail altogether. But I want to know what the Meitiner Center would be if you had the keys to a castle in a mall. And I know that you could easily say, well, is it an A position mall or is it a D position mall? I'll let you kind of riff on that. But what would you do if you were the emperor of one of these malls and you had a green light to remake it? What would it look like?
Well, I think you've got to start with, who your customer is, because as you say, depending on where you are in the country, depending on the demographic. But what you've got to do is you've got to recognize two things that I think people have learned over the last 12 months. Mental health and physical engagement are two very important things for everyone. And people have suffered because those have been compromised. So what you want to offer is a center that is going to provide the space and physical engagement which is going to attract people. So it can't just be about picking up a shopping cart and filling it with stuff. What you've got to do is it's got to be multifaceted. So you want to add convenience and simplicity. So some of the great things that you would offer, if you're returning something, have centralized return spaces. If there's curbside pickup, have curbside pickup as efficient as toll booths on the motorway. Centralize everything so that people's time is respected. Create spaces within the mall where people can gather and have experiences, whether it's a dining experience, which they can't have online, or meeting friends or what have you. Also provide convenience by maybe you have a daycare center for pets, you have some medical facilities there. You need to think about the broad needs of that community. Why are strip malls and neighborhood strip malls becoming more attractive? Because they're nearby and they're providing convenience. There could be a certain renaissance there. So the new community galleria has to be a little bit like going to the old high street. You go there for a whole myriad of different things. So for me, I would build it around bringing the indoors outside. So I would use some of the adjacent spaces for either parks or outdoor dining. I might build some residential. I might build some co-working office space, because if you build co-working office spaces, although people are going to be working from home a lot, if they can go and rent a desk in a local co-working space that then has all this wonderful community galleria around them. So what I'm going to look at is, what are the needs of my local community? And I'm going to be unhindered by any historical approaches to what a shopping mall is. And I think I said 12 months ago that with this gaming trend, you could have an arena
Right.
within a shopping mall where people go and watch the guys playing in the playoffs in whatever game of choice it is. It's just recognizing that the future is going to be different from the past. And the best example I can quote, if you go back into high streets 20 years before we had cell phones,
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't have found a cell phone store on the high street. They're all over the place now. Maybe they won't be there in 20 years' time. I don't know. But we have to have faith that things continue to evolve and pivot as demand changes. And that's why I don't subscribe to the view that it's doom and gloom for retail or it's doom and gloom for shopping malls. We're just going to see it change and
Right.
continue to change. Um, and technology is going to be a key part of that. I mean, one of the reasons businesses are failing today is they didn't become digitally native or digitally competent and didn't have and had a weak e-commerce platform. If you're not playing across the whole omni-channel space, you're
You're
not
dead.
playing. You're
Yeah,
not
you're dead.
playing. You know.
So let's go back through. I mean, you have the gift of hindsight and the gift of experience where, obviously I lived through 9/11, but wasn't in the workforce yet. I lived through the financial crisis and was still finding my footing and was highly affected. But this is a little different, or it's a lot different than either one of those. I'd love for you to kind of reach back and maybe give us an example of another time that you've seen retail have to pivot on more of a macro scale, or just some lessons that you've taken from other crises, if they're vertical specific or market specific, or if they're a macro event like this. I'd love for you to reach back and help us with some lessons that we could learn and apply to today.
Whenever I've looked at and gone into and managed turnarounds, there's two things that I found. The first is that the companies had lost sight of the future, which sounds a strange thing to say, but they were operating in the moment and they weren't conscious of other things that were going on. I mean, one of the big criticisms of companies affected by COVID is all COVID did was accelerate what was happening anyway.
Right.
So, yes, they can complain about COVID, but if they'd done something 5 years earlier, all these trends were happening. So the first thing was the companies had lost sight of the future, and therefore their strategies were not winning strategies, and their business models were becoming dated. The second thing was generally people had been undervalued. There
The
was
actual workers, the frontline workers, or
well, no, at
the customer.
the management level, you had organizational dysfunction caused by, a lot of companies, they keep adding layers and layers and layers. I mean, that's what department stores did, right? They had layers and layers and layers of management. And you have a bureaucracy that builds up. It's not nimble. And you have conflicts and you have different agendas. And so the great thing is when you go into to do a turnaround is you look at the situation and you interview all the people, and you're able to bring a clarity that others can't. Let's get rid of 2 layers of management. Well, you can't do that. Of course you can do that. All they're doing is creating work for each other. So the 2 things that I have seen that were real problems was organizational dysfunction around people, and that applies to any sector, not just retail, and losing sight of the future. And one of the things you cannot accuse the great entrepreneurs, I mean, Bezos, he saw the future, right? He was unconstrained. And it's probably a good time for him to step back and let someone else come in and take a fresh look. So you need to regenerate. And so those were the things that I saw. I mean, yes, you can speak to, for example, in the case of duty-free shoppers, DFS, we were making a fortune out of the Japanese tourist, and that was because prices in Japan were artificially high because of the way the price structures worked in that country. So when they went overseas, they went crazy for buying foreign goods, which had great perceived value back in Japan. But as prices fell in Japan, there was a need to pivot to other markets like China, etc. There were some companies that got stuck with just focusing on the Japanese. And by the time they figured it out, there were all these other markets which others had penetrated more aggressively. So if you lose sight of the future, if you don't have a good insight of what's going on, then you're going to be in trouble. Look at linens and things, and Bed Bath and Beyond. To me, they're two very good examples. Linens and things were doing extraordinarily well. Bed Bath and Beyond came along with some new approaches to the home business. Linens and things did not change, and they liquidated. Today, Bed Bath and Beyond is now facing the same challenge.
Same problems.
Same problems. So again, what you've got to do is keep pivoting. Look at Harrods, what they've done, something very interesting. So they've created a specialty brand called H Beauty. So they're realizing the big box stuff doesn't work. It's so expensive to run these big boxes. Let's do smaller boxes. Look at what Nordstrom's are doing with some of their concepts. So what you've got to constantly do, and they're doing these neighborhood type service approach. And I applaud all of these things, because if you stay stuck where you are, then the Untuckits and the Bombuses and the people who are selling underwear and all these other things, they're going to have you for lunch, because they are looking to respond to changing consumer demand. When Sephora came into the US, the department stores tried to stop Sephora by putting pressure on the brands to not supply us, which is a normal competitive thing. They owned the market at that point. But the trouble, what they didn't see, was that Sephora and people like Ulta's ascendancy was inevitable.
Right.
Because we were responding to the customer. And I think that's why I'm so optimistic about retail, because people need that physical experience. You and I want to get out and do things with our kids. We want to go into spaces where we can have a lunch, maybe do some browsing, maybe go to some cultural thing. We want to do that. Now it's up to the retailers to provide those experiences, and things like contactless checkouts, some of the new technologies where you can go into stores and you can look at yourself wearing a suit or a woman wearing a dress, without actually putting it on. There's so much good stuff going on there that will add to the value of the experience. And it's an experience that you cannot get online. And so whilst online is here to stay, and it will probably continue to grow, you wait and see what happens in terms of...
Yeah, we're communal people.
Yeah,
100%.
we're communal people. That's who we are.
So Howard, you've already been extremely gracious with your time. I've got three, quick knee-jerk questions that I want to end with. But before I do that, tell people how they can connect with you, how they can hear what you're doing. I don't know if you do social media or LinkedIn, or how can people find out more about your wisdom and the things that you've done and the things that you're doing now, and just how can people reach out and connect with you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, so they can H Meitiner, so they can reach me there. And I also, along with my colleagues at Karl Marx Advisors, we are there to help others, help companies. Just reach out to us on the website. That's Karl, C-A-R-L, and Marx, advisors.com. So reach out to us there. I also do mentoring and coaching and things like that. So if anyone wants to reach out and just pick my brain on anything, they're more than welcome to.
That's amazing. All right. All right. 3 questions. You ready?
Yeah.
So you mentioned early in the podcast that the problems that you go in and try to solve are always the same. You mentioned that companies lose sight of the future. You mentioned that people are undervalued. Give me one more that is absolute. You can set your watch to it that you know is going to be bubbling under the surface if you go into for one of these turnarounds or distressed companies.
They're absolutely overburdened with debt.
Yeah.
They've lost sight of the importance of having cash. And what happens is the debt burden becomes
Start
so
making
much
bad decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, but you keep having to pay the interest on the debt, and eventually that will catch up with you.
Okay. Second question. We mentioned we mentioned JCPenney's, Macy's, and Harrods, and all of these big boxes. Obviously, that's not a business that a lot of people want to jump into at the moment, just because they're having their fair share of problems, debt, size, all of those things. But I've seen some new concepts that are interesting to me, and they're kind of retail curation as a service, much like the department stores started at a million years ago, like Neighborhood Goods, Naked, Beta, and there's a few more that I can think of. Macerich has one called Brand Box, and they're these curation services. They're small, they're nimble, they can change a little bit quicker. Do you think that is something that we should pay attention to in the future, or do you think that's just a kind of a stopgap blip in the radar as we figure out what the next thing is?
Huge opportunity. You look at the thing, I don't know if you've heard of ghost kitchens.
Oh, yeah, of course.
But ghost kitchens are a great example of where you're leveraging existing infrastructure to present entrepreneurial ideas, in this case, menus, to consumers. So, no, I think this whole, I was reading somewhat persuaded that these neighborhood strip malls and the type of localized services and these low-cost startups, they're the ones who've got it right. I mean, there's the old thing where you have, $10 million or $15 million worth of funding, and the entrepreneurs go crazy and spend it all, and then the investors have to try and pull them back into focus. I think the more you can experiment with ideas like that at a low cost, you're going to have some that don't work, but you're going to find ones that do. So in the case of Sephora, when you've got 500, 600, 1,000 locations, you can try a brand in 5 locations. You don't have to do it across the thing. Try it.
Test
So
markets.
I think that flexibility, that nimbleness, that local aspect to it is a big deal, and I think it's here to stay.
All right, Howard. Last question. You ready for this? There's a lot of pressure on you. I know you're stressed out right now.
Yeah, I am.
Biggest lesson that you've learned over your storied career, or most expensive lesson that you've learned, something that you wouldn't wish upon someone else following in your footsteps, that you want to touch on, that people can kind of learn from your experience?
Trust your instincts. Whenever I've obviously hired and fired thousands of people during the course of my career. Occasionally, I've had an instinct that someone is not right, and you stay with them, and a problem only gets worse over time. And it doesn't matter whether it's a person or whether it's a business unit. You've got to trust your instincts. And then when you have something you need to do, be mercilessly objective in making the cuts necessary. Make the deepest cuts the first time. If one is critical of the department stores, they closed 100 stores, then they closed 150, then they came back. You should have closed 500 or 600 or 1,000 right from the beginning, got rid of the problems, and then really focused on the future. We recently at Karl Marx did a very successful turnaround with a restaurant concept. And we closed 60 of the 110 locations. We got rid of all the unprofitable locations, leaving a very profitable, very entrepreneurial, very successful business in its wake. If we had cut 10 and then another 10,
kicking the can down the road,
what you're doing is you're disrupting the business, you're creating morale problems, and you're avoiding the issue. So that's the big thing that I've learned in my career.
Mercilessly objective is a soundbite that I'm going to take away from this. I think that was phenomenal. Howard, let me take just 1 second and acknowledge you for coming on, sharing a tremendous amount of knowledge, leadership, wisdom, some scar tissue with us. For one, I took an entire page of notes. I'm sure there's others out there that'll do the same. I just want to take a second to acknowledge you. Thank you for coming on and sharing your knowledge with us. It's been a real pleasure just getting to know you for the last few minutes. And I think other people would probably share that as well.
Yes. And sharing music as well.
Oh, of course. Well, that's the most, well, just wait for the second podcast. It's all going to be about white hat, black hat, Stones versus the Beatles. Howard, thanks again for coming on Retail to Redeveloped. My name's Adam Williams, and thank you to all of our listeners and watchers for joining us today as well.
Thanks a lot.